everybody. You're listening to and watching the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Steve Morey.
And I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
And we are your hairy, heavy homos that talk about comic books, but you don't have to be a hairy, heavy homo to listen in, or in this case, stream in. Sorry for the case of the giggles there. Caleb said something right before we departed and then came back after the countdown, and I scrambled to try and do something, and it didn't work. So y'all don't have to know about that. But surprises. Anyway, we're back with you, and we have a bunch of comic books to talk about. Also, this week, in fact, yesterday, was the premiere of Loki, the new series on Disney Plus, continuation of the MCU character. And we all saw the first episode, and we're going to talk about that as well as aforementioned funny books. So, I don't know which of you want. Go ahead.
Just want to say that even though Brian Pittard can't join us today, he is going to be doing some lurking in the comments, and so he's popped a quick comment. Caleb left you gagging.
It's already started. Here we go.
Anyway.
Y'all motherfuckers need Jesus. All right. All right, Loki. I don't know which of you two want to start talking about it. Up in the air. So who wants to go first talking about this series? It looks like Steve.
Oh, okay.
Steve.
Okay, well. So I mean we've had two MCU TV series already. We're not going back in time about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the first one was WandaVision, which was just fantastic.
There was more than Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
There was also Agent Carter, but apparently that's not canon anymore. I don't know.
That's apparently a glitch that happened with some of the overseas that accidentally put some of them in the legacy. But until there's an official announcement, that is part of the MCU. Inhumans is part of the MCU. Cloak and Dagger, Runaways, and Hellstrom. They're all part of the MCU. They were all part of that system, along with the Netflix shows. So, until I see Kevin Feige saying, zip, nooch, nada, no more.
I'm going to say once we're in the multiverse, it doesn't really matter anyway.
Yeah.
Just like DC did with Crisis. But in any case, this is the third Disney Plus MCU TV series after the amazing WandaVision and the Falcon and Winter Soldier.
In the end, I enjoyed Falcon and Winter Soldier more than WandaVision. I thought WandaVision had loftier goals, but I thought as pure entertainment, I would probably give the edge to Falcon and Winter Soldier.
And see, I would say the reverse on the entertainment side.
Okay.
I agree. WandaVision had really lofty goals. I think they hit the mark almost every time.
Yeah,
greatly. And Falcon had a lot of great action, but there were some choices. I think some narrative choices that kind of hit some dead ends to me. Certain interactions I think could have gone a little bit further. Maybe some scenes that could have been tightened a bit.
Yeah, we're not talking about that.
Well, some amazing moments.
You're wrong, but we're not talking about that tonight. Okay. So.
I'm never wrong.
Honey, Loki, you were just very wrong about something 5 minutes before we went on. All right, go ahead.
We've got Loki. We got Loki. So Loki takes place immediately after the events in Avengers Endgame. The redo of that scene that immediately was at the end, or I guess the part that we didn't technically see in the original Avengers movie, where Loki is being carted out in shackles, and in Endgame we know that something changed, and that was Loki got the Tesseract back and zoomed out of the screen and disappeared. We don't know what happened to him. Well, now we do. He ended up in Inner Mongolia. For some reason. And in appearing in Inner Mongolia, he encountered some interesting people, some military types that just come right out of thin air. Doors open up in thin air, and of course come out and basically call him a variant, and capture him to bring him back to the TVA. And of course, after that happens in a very confusing, very fun little sequence there, we find out that the TVA is the Time Variance Authority, who, as a collective bureaucratic department, is responsible for maintaining the unified timeline across the multiverse into a single timeline that was put in place, I guess, by the timekeepers. So we're going to talk about those. But Loki is, of course, confused, really frustrated, because he's Loki, and he's like, what are all these little piss ants doing? I'm a god. What am I doing here? This is ridiculous. And he finds he's absolutely powerless to change his current state. Meet some really interesting characters. There's some really great actors in this. Gugu Mbatha-Raw plays Ravonna Renslayer, which I'm not too familiar with, but she is a comic character. Wunmi Musaku, who played Ruby in Lovecraft Country, one of my favorite actors from that show, and she doesn't have a huge part in this, but she does have a pretty fun role on screen. And then also one of my crushes, Eugene Cordero, again has like a very, very quick role as sort of a poor little peon, managing inventory and evidence in the files. And of course, we've got Tom Hiddleston reprising his role as Loki, and Owen Wilson as the agent.
We seem to have lost Bill.
We have lost Bill, but the people listening didn't know that. But he's back.
I'm back.
He's back. But yeah, I was just wrapping up. Owen Wilson playing Agent Mobius, who I believe is also a character from the comics, who I'm not very familiar with. And the dynamic between the two is pretty dang cool. Lots of great dialogue. This is a very talky episode. Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of great exposition. You have some interesting asides of some evil variant that's skipping through time and killing agents and causing havoc and creating these splinter branched pathways that could potentially create even more havoc in the multiverse. And lead to either a collapse or possibly another war. Again, all things that happen in the exposition. But the quick twisty reveal at the end. Surprise, not a surprise, not sure. Don't want to ruin it just yet until we talk about it. But I thought this was a really great first episode.
Thought it was fun, yeah. So you were talking about the other two like big television series that we've had here lately. WandaVision tickled my intellectual fancy way more than a lot of things in the MCU I've ever done. I found it to be the most layered than anything the MCU has done before, and so that, like, to me, that's my favorite. For similar reasons that I enjoyed Jessica Jones from the Netflix series. I thought there was more there to think about than a lot of the other shows. Whereas, Falcon and Winter Soldier, made me want popcorn. Like, I just wanted to shovel popcorn into my face. And it was a big, dumb, fun adventure. This does something that neither one of those two do. I mean, there were things in Falcon and Winter Soldier that I think culturally were important. Obviously, lots of context and layers. But at the end of the day, punch and fight your way out of it. This does something really interesting in the fact that I'm not a big fan of time as a mechanical device in anything really, but this plays with it really well. And I thought, like, as I was watching it, there were moments where I'm like, oh, but how are they going to explain this? Oh, that's okay. They just did. So really off the bat, they kind of like raised and dismissed so many roadblocks that they could have had. So I think that, like, they're on the ball. I really appreciated that. Love seeing Tom Hiddleston in anything. All in all, yeah, it was like Roger watched it with me, and he was kind of in the same boat. He's like, this seems like it's going to do something different, and I'm curious. And I think that's where it left me, is just kind of curious more than anything.
Yeah.
My big reservation with it is that I've never had Loki as a favorite character. Because I do think there's so many inconsistencies there that rarely ever reconcile. his love for, his undying love for his mother, that kind of came out of nowhere in the trajectory of the Marvel films.
Yeah.
There are certain comic book treatments of him that I've really enjoyed. I love the Loki that was in Dan Slott's Mighty Avengers. I love that version. I loved when they offered him membership in the Avengers. Because they were like, hey, because of you, we even exist, and his reaction to that, I thought, well, God, he's got a nice take on that character. I thought, as great as Simonson's run is, the Loki there is kind of flat. So there's, I imagine it's a fairly difficult character to write long term. I think Hiddleston is great in the role, but I just never really cottoned to the character. I thought Owen Wilson was perfect. I thought this was perfect use of him, and I like you, Steve. I really liked their scenes with their interaction. Who was the actress that was kind of like the drill sergeant one?
The other agent who was more the actress. That was she doesn't really get a name. She's like Hunter something in the cast list, but the actress is Wunmi Mosaku.
I thought that was just unnecessarily one note. To the point where I was so bored 3 seconds into her, because I could tell what the next line she was going to say was each time out.
Yeah,
bored. I thought the reveal at the end was cool. I thought how we get from where we are here to that's an interesting story. And like Caleb, as you said, I don't know what twists and turns we're going to encounter in doing that. I wish I enjoyed it more, and a lot of it comes down to the character preference. It's just not a character I would ever rank highly among my favorites, and when that's the lead character, that's going to color how much you're going to enjoy it. So just like if DC had a Lobo series, I'd watch it, but I'd be like, oh, I'm watching a Lobo series,
really?
Really. So
they almost had a Lobo series, so almost
a few times, But I just wish I enjoyed it more, because I did think it was well done. I think there's interesting places it can go. I just wish I cared more about the character for my own enjoyment's sake.
Yeah.
So interesting that you would talk about the character of Loki, and I mean, in the way that he's presented in the movies. I mean, he's been in several films, not just the Avengers. He's been in Avengers, Thor 2, Thor 3, and had major roles in all of those. And then, of course, appeared briefly at the beginning of Infinity War, where he met his demise. And of course, in this first episode, it kind of explains that, like Caleb had mentioned, it kind of explains sort of like how time works, in that the Loki, who's the main character of this, is just a variant. The rest of the movies happened. They went on, and off he went, and he ended up dying. And the cool thing is, Owen Wilson gets to show him all of that. So he gets to see all these situations. He gets to see Freya getting stabbed. He gets to see, he and Thor reconciling and, being friends again. And then, of course, gets to see himself get strangled and have his neck snapped by Thanos. So he does see his entire life story played out, literally, on a holographic projector. But there are a couple other moments here that really are kind of surprising. The fun little bit where he tries to get the Tesseract back, the Cosmic Cube back, and one of my favorite scenes, Eugene Cordero, who's the actor, it's like, oh, you want that? And then he opens up the drawer, and there's a Tesseract and like dozen Infinity Gems just rattling around in there, and he's like, "Oh my God, look at all these stones!" And they're like, "Yeah, I mean, we have so many of them. The guys here use them like paperweights." And of course, if you stay for the end credits, you get to see a gag where they're using it as a paperweight.
What's a fish?
What's a fish? I want to know what that. I don't know. I've been here my entire life. I was created for this purpose. I mean, there were some great funny moments, and that's what Loki usually brings, is some kind of humor. But also, I like how the explanation that Owen calls him out on. It's like, how are you the god of mischief? This isn't very mischievous. You're kind of like a murderous asshole. And Loki's like, I guess I'm not. No, I am. And it's a very interesting, like through talking, he really does get to confront who he is and what his purpose is. And again, they do bring up, Bill, like you mentioned, they bring up the point. It's like, if it wasn't for Loki, we wouldn't have the Avengers. You know, they were brought together specifically so they could avenge Agent Coulson because you did it. And it was thanks to you that the Avengers came together and saved the planet and, you know, continued to save humanity and the universe and galaxy, et cetera, et cetera. So very, very cool. Very cool. But I mean, it's only a 6-episode series. So like Falcon the Winter Soldier, we get 6 1-hour episodes. Where do you think they're going to go from here?
So that's one of my things that I'm curious about. So if you, like I said, I'm not a fan of time being played as a mechanical device, but you know, I know a little bit. And actually, I pulled out the Marvel Ohatmu Omnibus and stuff to see if I could find them, but they're not actually listed in there, which I thought was kind of unfortunate and interesting. But you know, if you know the history of those people, it's a group that was invented by the he who lords over all, or I forget what I got, the figure of God, essentially in Marvel, and so it opens up the potential to talk about things like infinity, you know, especially if you're getting into like the Simonson Thor run and all the mechanics of that could lead up to the next big Marvel movie, which is going to be, and of course I wanted to say it and my brain shut down. The movie that's coming out after Black Widow,
Eternals.
And Shang-Chi is first, so it's okay. Black Widow, Shang-Chi, and then Eternals. Yep.
So there's a lot that could lead up to that this show could actually plant the seeds for, and I'll be curious if they get into that, leading up to things like Infinity and the one above all, which is I think right for this type of show, right? Like if you're gonna take me out of the standard timeline and you're gonna show me really this Kirby-esque mechanics 1970 style universe that juxtaposes, you know, the monotony of everyday life in a cubicle versus the building blocks of time and all these other different time streams that also still plays by the rules set up in the Avengers in the Thanos timeline. That it is ripe for mining for those like larger than life high concept characters, and I think that's where they're inevitably going to hit. I'm not going to be disappointed if they don't, because I'm rarely disappointed in these things, because you know, as Bill said earlier, Kevin Feige has not steered us wrong yet, like as far as the way things go. But I really do want to see those high concept characters. Like I want to see the Eternals. I want to see these Kirby-esque, I don't know if you call them Kirby creations or Kirby-esque creations, really brought to life and really break that mold that they've set up. I think that would be incredibly cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Fantastic Four. I mean, that's exactly what I think this is. I mean, the whole first several phases of Marvel kept referring to the Celestials. So you had the giant head that was nowhere from Guardians of the Galaxy. It's just kind of taken for granted that this is a head of some giant galactic being that we're all living in and mining. To mentioning it with the creation of the Infinity Gems or the Infinity Stones, is that the Celestials themselves, were part of the essence that went into the creation of these Infinity Stones. But it's just it's always been played with. So we know about this. If you paid attention to the lore from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., if you stayed with that, and the idea of the Inhumans, the ancient Kree experiments with the Inhumans and all of that. But it's all been kind of played with. But even still, like, we've been introduced to those, and they're not as huge as, say, Kirby would have made them yet. And that's why I'm really, like you, I'm excited about the Eternals, because we could finally get to experience that hugeness. But with I think this is really, really setting up Doctor Strange, and just like WandaVision did, sort of the idea of the multiverse and what could happen with that. And when you get into Doctor Strange, I mean, we talked about it when we were talking about Ditko several months ago. One of Doctor Strange's first big adventures was meeting eternity, meeting the concept of eternity himself. And I mean, this is setting that up. I think, once we get into these giant, like, bigger than the galaxy, bigger than the universe, like, overarching things. I mean, it's the next step is seeing these giant, like, the concept characters, the Marvel concepts of the universe, personified, like Eternity and the Living Tribunal and other such characters. So maybe we might have some more inkling of that in this show. I mean, the Timekeepers, the fact that they're talking about them is kind of interesting. Or is it? Or is that a red herring?
I don't think so, given... I don't think so.
Yeah.
Just going on my gut.
So we're actually going to possibly see these Timekeepers?
Or some version of them, possibly.
And I do know, I did do some wiki diving, so maybe it's the Timekeepers? Maybe it's not the Timekeepers who are the Timekeepers? I'm referring to the Time Twisters, so I don't know too much about the history as much, but I do know that the Time Twisters and Timekeepers are kind of two sides of the same coin, more or less. One set of three was created in a really shitty timeline where everything went wrong, and they were basically breaking the timeline. And then, of course, the ones that were created that went well in the good timeline. So you have good and bad, but are they really? There is no good and bad, and I think they do mention this in this. In the first episode, where it's like we don't really look at it in terms of good and bad. We just look at it and, like, this is what's supposed to happen because that's what's supposed to happen. The Timekeepers, of course, were considered bad, but the Time Twisters. But at the same time, the Timekeepers technically also wanted to do bad things, like kill the Scarlet Witch, make sure the Avengers never existed, all these other things in the comics, anyway.
In terms of the big concept Marvel characters, with what we know about What If, which I know they've said is MCU, yet it isn't. That it's is there any confirmation if the Watcher's involved in that?
Yeah, I think wasn't there like a glimpse of Uatu just like appearing in sort of like in one of the trailers? I think they had a very short like clip of Uatu, and potential isn't he also potentially the narrator?
That's what I mean. Yeah, because I think he's a good Kevin Bacon. 6 Degrees of Uatu, in terms of linking a lot of these forces, which for me also would include naturally Galactus. And a lot of Fantastic Four. And also just in terms of what was touched on in Annihilation, we've only scratched the surface of Marvel Cosmic. So
teeny tiny bits,
and especially when we do have the next Guardians film and the Thor film, which is going to have a cosmic element to it as well. Be interesting to see what we see next.
And with the Eternals, I mean, they have to introduce some kind of cosmic element there. It looks like the movie takes place mostly on Earth, but again, when Marvel shows us a preview, that preview means absolutely nothing, because usually
absolutely. And with the Loki preview, every bit of footage was in the first episode.
Exactly.
Was in the trailer. So
no No idea what comes after.
Yeah.
What
So
afterwards,
if
but
you're thinking he existed in the '60s with a suit on and gained notoriety, they may have just tied that in a bow in the first episode. And that's all we know about it. So
yeah.
I hope not, because I think there's a pretty funny story there to tell. But
Well, I'm a huge
if
fan
you
of
watch
that.
the episode,
that
you'll know
mystery, so.
immediately. I will say though, the press copies went out and had the first 2 episodes, and what has been universally reinforced in those reviews is that the first episode is all set up and the second episode has a very, very different vibe. So
Yeah,
so that'll be interesting.
This was where all the exposition gets thrown at the viewer, like right all up front between Owen Wilson and Loki talking. But afterwards, it just sounds
animated movie, that animated bit. Oh, I love that.
Miss Minutes.
That was my favorite.
I love that.
Miss Minutes was so good.
Yeah,
she was so funny. I loved it. It was so perfectly done, and so like, so it fits in this show.
Yeah,
because with Loki, even though there's some serious stuff that's going to go down for sure, there's death, there's death, there's fire, there's all sorts of violent deaths. It's Loki, so there's going to be some goofiness.
Yeah.
Death by fire, death by stabbing. And my curiosity. So, one of the things that was mentioned briefly, because somebody asked about it, because somebody had to ask about it, some comic journalist, about Loki as a character. In the comics, Loki's pretty gender fluid. There actually are times where he is Lady Loki. There have been times where he's a child, both a male and a female child. So like he's kind of gone through, different genders pretty easily and maintained Loki-ness. It's just Loki, with different bits. But I think this is a chance for them to do that. And I know with some of the casting and some of the actors who have been cast in this, looking at the cast list, some of them still do not have character names. And I'm curious if some of these some of these actors who've been hired don't also turn out to be Loki. So I'm really looking forward to where they can play with it. Will we see a McKelvey version of, young Loki and or young Lady Loki? And I can't remember what her name was. But yeah, I mean, and then of course, Lady Loki herself. And
has Loki ever been a non-human, like a dog or a antelope or something? I don't know why I thought antelope.
Antelope. Like a
I'm just thinking because since we did have Thor Frog, I was just wondering if we had some kind of version of that.
I don't think that they've ever gone the full Zeus route with him, where he's turned into like a bull or a swan or anything. But they changed up the mythology for the films. But I mean, you got to remember, like, Loki's child is the giant dog that gives us Ragnarok. Yeah. So I mean, even in the way that they present offspring, even though the way they present his offspring, Fenrir is not a human. So it's beyond even the genetics of mankind. Yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me if they went some kind of route with that, and they should. I mean, he's a god. He's a god of mischief, especially. What's more mischievous than being a shapeshifter? I mean, we see it with some of the greatest Marvel. Villains of all time. Mystique is a great example of that. That are fluid. They're fluid characters, and that lets them get into any door possible. It's amazing.
You can do all sorts of things with that if you're writing that character who, it could be and appear any way that you want it to be. As a writer, it's great to have a shapeshifter, I would think. Maybe not. Maybe it's the worst because it's like, everything's a Deus Ex Machina. They just change who they are.
It's a great out clause.
Yeah. So just really quickly, we do have some people joining us today in the cave. We've got David Toby.
Hey, David.
Hey, friendos. We've got Tony Gilkinson as well. Hello, hey, handsome Tony. Man. Well, thank you, Tony. We also have John Runyon.
I have to tell you, Tony ended up buying I Never Promised You a Rose Garden from our recommendation. So
That's awesome. Tell us what you think, Tony, because we loved it. Hopefully you love it too. But if you don't,
And David, I got Nottingham #3 in my box today.
Woohoo! So, me too.
Yep.
And John Runyon also he has popped by from a comic book look.
What did he say after he said assemble? What did he say after that?
His new 51 preaching Marvel. I tuned in at the right time. David also does. Oh, mention really quickly. David also, when we were talking about the Lobo TV series. Okay, but what about a Lobo series starring Jason Momoa as Lobo?
He's already made his imprint on something and would not be believable beyond that in that particular universe.
Yeah. Well, and also for me, I picture Lobo as, sure, he's got long hair, but he's also like really hairy, I think, in most ways that he's drawn. So he's just like a giant muscle bear who smells like garbage. So basically.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Okay. Do you want to start talking about some comic books, or maybe we should go around the horn here first and show off what we're wearing?
I would be good with that.
Okay, Steve, let's start with you.
Oh, well, for those of you who tuned in a few months ago, I did wear this Pride X-Wing shirt before, but if you didn't, then I'm wearing my Pride X-Wing shirt.
Okay.
Mine's fairly simple. It's a HRC Mighty Gay T-shirt that I got. Actually got it a few years ago when I was in San Francisco. I swung by the San Francisco or LA, I forget which one. Swung by the local HRC just to pop in and say hi, and because I'm weird and I do that when I go to strange towns. So and grab this, and I'm glad I did because it's comfortable and it's mighty gay.
Nice,
mighty gay.
Well, you probably recognize who I got on my shirt, and yes, it's Wuffle Below. This was part of the reissue program that Loose had instituted for a couple of T-shirts that had been retired for a time, and provided some new ones. And I also got a bunch of Wuffle Below stickers that I just can't wait to put on things. So
everything, mailboxes,
Also, I have to say, I went to a comic book convention this past Saturday, which I talked about in the last episode, and it was really cool. People who were there with their girlfriends talking about how much they dug Wuffle Below. That was really, really cool to hear that from people. So,
yep, that is pretty cool.
Yep. All right, we're going to talk about the funny books. Let's start off as we always do with Steve. Tell us about something you're reading that you're digging.
Well, I'm going to go with one of the things that I made a pledge to this month is I'm going to talk about one graphic novel per episode. And keeping with the theme of Pride Month, it is going to be queer themed or queer character or queer written book that I'll be talking about. And so for this week, it is Cannonball by Kelsey Roten, and I believe this is Kelsey's first full book, and it started off, I believe, as different web comics that were then I think compiled together. But this came out in 2019, and it's published by Uncivilized Books, which I'm not familiar with. This is the first Uncivilized published book that I've read. So this is pretty interesting. It's got an interesting. I'd say it's had some pretty varied feedback from lots of readers and lots of critics. Some critics really enjoyed it, and some readers really loved it, and then some not so much. And I think a lot of it hinges on the main character, Caroline. Obviously, in a book like this, it's a character study of Caroline, and she is a lesbian who is just out of college. She just finished her program, her BFA program in writing. And so she's at that kind of sensitive age, that 22, 23, where you're kind of in the middle of things. You've spent the past, 14, 16 years of your life in school. Everything has been academic. And now you're flung into real life. And she doesn't want to leave. She wants to stay in academia, but she didn't get into a grad program. So she's just kind of trying to maintain her life. maintain sort of the intellectual social bubble that she lived in all of college. So just so you know, she is not a very likable character. She is constantly lording her intellect over other people. She's very full of herself. She talks about the pain, is basically living in her spleen, to use the old romantic term. She's constantly just talking about the pain of herself in the universe and how people just don't understand. They can't understand. If they did understand, they would hate everything about me. And thankfully, she has a relatively level-headed group of characters that are around her. Her best friend Penelope, who is also a lesbian and was from the same writing program. Her other friend Trevor, who graduated a year or two ahead of her, who ended up going straight into marketing work and all of that, and then hires Penelope as well. She's just a messed up girl, and she has a lot of struggles that I think a lot of people have coming right out of college. And I think Kelsey does an amazing job at highlighting that by being very much in the head of this character. I know I've thought some of the same things. I've had the same weird social intellectual bubble that happens when you're surrounded by theory and other intellectual type of discussion. I mean, when you're in school, the things you talk about with your colleagues is very different than when you're out of school, when you're out of an academic environment, when you are in real life, when you're in a new job, when you're trying to get along in life. You can't just sit down and talk about like the darkness overwhelming your soul and why that's really important, and why everybody else is a complete and utter fool other than you and the people who think like you, and without having a lot of backlash. And I think she pretty much personifies that kind of character. So that's why it's hard to like her. Especially for somebody, I know like me, where I probably had a lot of conversations like her with people, and we all kind of, sat around intellectually, spitting a lot of this stuff out. I think there's a lot more depth to this character. And if you read very deeply into it, I think Kelsey does a really great job at bringing out something understandable about this character. She writes a children's book, and about halfway through, you start seeing excerpts from this book that ends up putting her on the path to massive success and renown. And she hates every second of it because it almost negates the fact that she is a tortured artist. How can you be a tortured, put upon artist if what you're putting out there is actually enjoyed by people? And she hates herself for doing it. She thinks she's selling her. She herself thinks she's sold out, and that nobody understands the real message of her story. But at the same time, she needs to get over herself, and I think she sees that by the end of this book. But anyway, it's pretty heavy in some parts. It's definitely good. Her relationship with her ex Sophie really screws her up. Her frenemyship with another ex of Sophie's, Emily, is very much triggered me because I've had people in my life very similar to that. I think this is great. I think it's a really good read if you don't immediately throw it away after the first 20 pages. Because if you really, really hate Carolyn, it's going to be very hard to finish this book. But if you can stick it out and really see kind of the ups and downs and the way that her psychology is presented, I think you're really going to enjoy it. So, Kelsey Roten's Cannonball.
I did have a similar situation in real life, and when I started working for my first law firm as a first year as an associate, after I'd been there for a number of years as a paralegal and then a law clerk, I shared an office with a woman, and she was stuck in that place. Everything was hyper intellectualized, and nothing was real world. Nothing. And she had a hell of a time adjusting because, and Caleb, I'm sure you've encountered some of these people in the last 2 years that you can tell when they make the transition into the workforce, they're going to have a hell of a time. the people I was most comfortable with were people that had some kind of break between undergrad and law school.
Right.
And there are some people that never have that break. It's just a trajectory that's solid and smooth, and they just bounce from that to that with just 3 months between that those two worlds. And when she was tasked to do what I thought were very simple things, such as calling clients, a complete inability to do it, a complete inability to relate to them as somebody who would not have the same intellectual base that she had when discussing, either a deposition date or something like that. I often wonder what happened to her, because I would not be surprised if she never shook that off. If she never shook that off. So
I think what's really
I'm sort of interested in reading that on that basis, since I did have exposure to that very closely and sharing an office for 7 months.
Yeah,
but I didn't have a great time sharing that office. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think Kelsey does a really good job of illustrating this with Carolyn. Carolyn thinks, because she's so intellectually advanced compared to everybody else around her, that nobody understands the concepts that she's trying to put out.
Right.
The fact is, and this illustrates it, other people are having those exact same crises of conscience, same self-doubt, same whatever. It's just the vocabulary that's being used. She can't relate to other people, and they can't relate to her because they're speaking different languages. And some of them are saying the same things, or some of them have gone through the same things, but she doesn't believe them because they're not using the same overflowered, overextended language that she is to describe those situations. And a lot of times it's hard for people to talk about why they're screwed up or things that are troubling them or things are problematic and how they don't relate to other people. And she just kind of coats it with this, I'll put up an extra wall because I worked for 4 years and I have a BFA in English, and therefore I know how to say all these things and understand all these concepts more than anybody else possibly could. Which some cases is true, some cases is not. And I think in this case, she is unfortunately feeling the effects of people getting pissed off because she's not listening to them. They understand her, but she's not communicating well, and she's clearly not listening to others.
That's kind of the pretentiousness of youth, right? Like, everybody under the age of 27 thinks that they're experiencing novel concepts and feelings and emotions and problems. And the fact is generationally, everybody's dealt with the same things. Like your life is not falling apart in the same way that anybody else's life has not fallen apart before. But you can't factor that in. Like, there's no way you can combat that, because that's something that only experience can. And I think David Toby said something in the chat that I think is directly on point. It's a failing. It's not just a failing of law schools. It's a failing of the educational system in general. A lot of times that forgets to practice people skills, like interpersonal communication.
I've become very close to somebody who's a medieval professor, and hearing some of the issues that he's been encountering with some of his higher performing students has been very interesting. It's what I saw with certain people in law school, but remixed. And also, because you're talking about dead cultures, that's an interesting snobbery level on top of that. So, I would not just pin that to law school. I've seen other examples, and
It's also I definitely want to read this book because I'm very interested in the mechanics of writing a character that's unlikable. Because I think in the general guys, especially of pop culture, you can get into the more hoity-toity, realistic fiction or whatever you want to call it, fictional realism. Which I think a lot of times we expect to be able to relate to the main character. We expect to be able to see through their eyes. It's hard to write a legitimately shitbag character and still come across as as being enjoyable. And so I'm curious about the actual craft mechanics of that. I'd like to check that out.
Yeah.
I think I've sufficiently hidden Lois Lane in the friendship challenge on that note. I thought it was a good handcraft.
I don't think that was purposeful, though.
Yeah.
That I think was just a sheer accident.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is definitely purposeful.
It made me think of the book I was talking about. I think last week, the fictional father book. Dude's a shitbag. Dude's a middle-aged dude who lives off his daddy's reputation, still whines about it, thinks himself an artist, cheats on his husband. Like, you don't like the dude, but you still want him to succeed. Like, there's something interesting about writing that kind of character.
Yeah, you hope for the best for them, for sure. And that's the thing. I felt the same thing with Carolyn. It's like, Carolyn, you're gonna fix it. Something's gonna happen. You're gonna fix yourself.
Carolyn,
does it happen? I don't want to ruin that. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's worse.
Okay, so it looks like Caleb grabbed the book there. So why don't we transition over to what you read there? Caleb, tell us about it.
Speaking of emotionally broken people, what is the one thing that you can do to really catch Bruce Wayne's attention and piss him off to the extent that he's probably never been pissed off before in comics?
I know where you're going, and I don't want to spoil.
Okay. Steve?
You actually have it twice in that book.
Yeah.
You actually have
piss off Bruce Wayne.
So I'm going to leave that for Steve.
How do you piss off Bruce Wayne the most? I mean, hey, he's had several characters that continuously vex him. Catwoman has always been vexing to him for different reasons. Harleen, good old Harley Quinn, has been vexing because she's just a nut, but she also is morally kind of ambiguous. And the Joker's been vexing because, well, he just kills everybody and makes life hard. I don't know. How would you vex?
You're off.
How would
you're
you?
So off.
You're thinking too hard in it, but that's okay. But that's the beauty of it, because there's lots of ways. But you go back to his roots and you take his parents away from him one more time. And that's exactly what Mark Waid did in 2000 in Justice League of America, The Tower of Babel. That's how he kicked it off. I don't know if you guys can see that. I just bought sorry about the glare, just bought the really cool hardcover. Got it. I had never read this before. I'm super excited.
Really?
Oh.
I've heard good things. Nope, first time. As legendary as I think this story is for what it does for the relationships in Batman's life. But like I said, Mark Waid and Howard Porter in the year 2000 did some groundbreaking work. Well, okay, maybe groundbreaking for me. I really.
Caleb, if you knew the early episodes, then you know of my distaste for Howard Porter's art.
I say
yeah. So my problem with him is, apart from some very inconsistent body types, his smiles are the creepiest things you will ever see. No one looks happy. Everyone looks like they have a toothache. I'm just not a fan, and it's a shame because the JLA run, which was Morrison, and then seamlessly into Mark Waid, and then seamlessly into Joe Kelly, is one of my favorite comic book runs of all time. And I wish my enthusiasm for it would be more amplified, but I just don't like him as an artist.
That's fair. I will admit there are several panels in this book where it reminded me of that meme where the guy's like choosing between two buttons and sweating, like that looks like Howard Porter draws like 7 people in this book. Yeah. So I get what you're saying, and for I think the last Justice League Justice Society thing I read was. Featured the Red Tornado, very different art style. So it was, to see this was kind of jarring. But I didn't mind it. I thought it was, I think for what it was, especially on some of the earlier issues before they get to this run where Howard Porter draws, there's a 2-issue arc that takes place on Rand where the Justice League goes to Rand, and they're dealing with Adam Strange and his wife coming back. Where also written by Mark Waid, where he really set some groundwork for some stuff he does later on. thought that was incredible. Like I think that work is it fits so well in the mold. But by the time you get to Tower of Babel, Mark Waid has jumped in a few times and set different seeds. And really, the themes that he's dealing with, if you get into his run up to this, is betrayal. If you've read Tower of Babel, you realize, and from the history of it, really who Batman is, and the fact that Batman trusts no one, and he's constantly dealing with the fact that he's going to be betrayed by those he loves the most, and by believing that and by taking actions on that, he ends up inevitably betraying those who trust him the most. It's this really cool dynamic. This is the story, and I'm not going to claim to be such the historian that I'm going to make the statement this is the first time that had happened. I have no idea. I don't know if we'd seen this before, but the whole thing builds around the premise that Batman has got a way to beat everybody. He's got the kryptonite in his belt. He sets every single person up. He blinds the Green Lantern by using his ring. He sends flamboyant nanobots all over Martian Manhunter to just drive him insane. He does all these things, but they don't know why it's happening, right? They have no idea why these things are taking place in the story. All they know is that things are breaking them across the board, and they've got to stop it. And they don't know how, and they know that Batman's really not into the picture. Something is distracting him. And the thing that's distracting him is that Ra's al Ghul has dug up his parents and stole the graves of Thomas and Martha Wayne. Going right back to his roots. The thing that really made Bruce Wayne, that drives Bruce Wayne drives Batman, to this day. And it's, for a little bit, it breaks the Justice League. And throughout the story, it just almost breaks your heart, because especially when you read it now, because the mistakes that Batman or Bruce Wayne is making. You know the legacy that these characters have after that, and the friendship between Batman and Superman, the friendship really between Diana and Clark and Batman, the Trinity. You see him take these steps, and you're like, don't do it. Like, why did you do that? How could you do that? And we know he has to. There's been several times where it's played off, and that's the only reason they exist. But I think Mark really breaks it down in the story to the really nuanced psychological notions of the very conditional relationships between these characters. They are close. They have the bond. They have the connection, and they do love each other. But for Batman, everything is conditional. Everything is if and then. With his relationships, and he really hits that point home. You get some great scenes with Ra's al Ghul and Talia, especially in the story. If anybody hasn't read this, I encourage you to go. You can get this hardcover collection. Is beautiful. It's got a bunch of stuff. Like I said, it's not just the Babel storyline. It has a wonderful introduction where Mark Waid goes in and talks about needing to take a break after he finished his Flash run. Like he was tapped out, and so he did. And they were going to give him Justice League, but they let Morrison take it over. And when and it just thrilled him, because in the introduction he calls Morrison his favorite comics writer of that time. So it made perfect sense. But then he started seeing what was happening, and he wanted to inject a little bit of it. And they came back and said, hey, like, start, I think, with issue 18 and write a 2-issue arc and plant a seed. And he did. It's the great story. And this is back in Superman Red and Blue days, where there's lots of things happening, but mostly somebody has broken the time continuum. There's been a character who's invented this machine that really it messes with probabilities in the way that you think of a character like Domino from Marvel would mess with probabilities, but it's doing it for him. It's setting him up to make him the best. But you take one thing to his benefit, and it makes it a detriment to the other, and it all revolves around the number 7. And they have to go in there and figure out how to take this machine. And again, that sets up the fears of all the characters. And so you really see the work that Mark Waid does from issue 18 of that. Then he comes back and does the Adam Strange storyline and Rand, same themes, seeds planted. And by the time you get to Babel, you're just like, you see the mechanisms and the method of the way that Mark Waid crafts and masterworks his story, and his knowledge of the history and the fundamentals, the genetics of these characters in a way that I think maybe 3 or 4 people on Earth can do. And Mark Waid is at the pinnacle of that list for me in the way that he treats these characters. So, like I said, really cool hardcover. Wasn't expensive. I think list price $34. So looks great on the shelf. So highly recommend this if you hadn't read it.
Okay. The only thing I'm going to say with that is there's a big tonal difference between the early issues where he was effectively a fill-in writer for 4 and then 2 issues.
Right.
I think the Dunnan one about the White Martian masquerading himself as Bruce Wayne, I love that story. That is a textbook Dunnan one story. It also has one of the funniest moments ever in JLA history where Plastic Man is disguising himself as Big Barda's dress. Then I also love the way that Waid can tell volumes within a few lines,
Right.
because after that's been exposed, you just see one Armani later. He's very good at economy sometimes, of moving the story forward, but you know everything you need to know about what happened off panel in those 3 words. I was a little surprised though that material was. I mean, I'm not surprised because it is everything Waid did for JLA up to this run, up to him becoming the regular writer with Tower of Babel. I think with Tower of Babel, there's some really wonderful moments. The tension between Superman and Batman, and the way that Clark is so speechless at points.
Right.
He doesn't say much, but what he says, is like a thunderstorm to Bruce. I think Bruce is somewhat redeemed in that those contingency plans included taking himself down.
Right.
And I'm surprised that wasn't really referenced in the story. You have a wonderful sequence at the end of the story, where you have basically everybody voting whether to keep him or not.
Yeah.
And their rationale for it on one end or the other. And of course, it comes down to Superman, and then there's the surprise at the end too,
Right.
which led into some of the next few issues, the Batman-less next few issues. I still maintain that I will always be a periodical comic book reader, because there's certain things that you have in your possession that you don't have from trade reading later on. I'm not saying it can't be a valuable experience. I'm not saying that at all, but there's a certain dynamic that's in place. And, like you said, Caleb, you have this more frantic than usual version of Batman for 2 issues. And, it's not just that, his parents are gone from the resting place. He knows he's caught, though nobody else does. And that's affecting him. And that moment at the end of that issue where he says it's my fault, I was like, what the hell is the next issue gonna be? Like where did this come from? And I also like the seeds that Tower of Babel planted in other areas. Grant Morrison has said, this was the moment Batman went too far.
Yep.
And there's a lot of backtracking in Grant Morrison's run, that led up to Batman R.I.P. of kind of taking him down a few pegs, of making that he's so hung up about dealing with people who have the powers of gods and goddesses that he tries to make himself the most like that as he can.
Right.
And he had to become more of a human being, because this was a time that he had gone too far. It was well intentioned. And I also liked the comparison to what John Jones had done. And that was something that was completely understood by the other team members. And also for people, if you're listening to this plot and you're like, well, I don't read JLA, but this sounds kind of familiar. They're one of the DC animated universe films, Justice League Doom, takes most of the germ of this. And represents it in that version of the DC universe. But it's a great story. I'm just interested in seeing. I'm just interested why. I know why they made the decision, but tonally, there's a very big difference between the 6 stories that come before it, and I know there's a couple of short stories from one of the JLA annuals or something, which I did read quickly. Yeah. But so like you said with the Adam Strange stuff, that wonderful moment at the end with Martian Manhunter and Adam Strange, it's somebody who actually Adam Strange lives a life where he doesn't think anybody understands what he's going through, and yet there's somebody right there.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool moments through that. Yeah.
And revisiting that story while I'm in the midst of reading Tom King's Adam Strange, I shouldn't just say Tom King, but Tom King's and Mitch Jarrett and
Doc Shaner.
Doc Shaner, their Adam Strange story that gives a lot of context to really who that character. Like I was not expecting that, and I'm like, oh man, like it is so neat to see them pull. I think they pull, like I've seen a few things that they have pulled from that story as far as like really boiling down who Adam Strange is. And Mark Waid has such a harness on these characters, on all of them. But I will say, like, you're talking about it, it seems like it wouldn't fit in. I can see how that's absolutely true. I mean, you think of the way that Morrison writes versus the way that Mark Waid writes, it would be way more of a less of a jolt to insert Mark Waid and say Jeff Johns into a Jeff Johns story versus the way that Morrison writes. But unfortunately, I none of that is in this book, so you just get the Mark Waid stuff, and it stacks up really well. And like I said, for somebody who's looking at the mechanics of things, it's like, oh, how can I like lay out a path? It's kind of a textbook on how to do that, in between issues. I thought that was fun. Also, I want to throw out, and just because it's Pride Month, that in the introduction to this, when Mark Waid is talking about Grant Morrison, he is very sure to use and notable to use they them pronouns, which is something that as since Grant Morrison has come out as non-binary, I know we all try to respect that and honor that, but a lot of times we mess up. But I have seen countless news outlets, this, that, and the other, kind of refuse to use that. And to have that enshrined in a hardcover this quickly, I think really cool. Like I appreciate the fact that they did that when they did that. So good for them.
Steve, anything you want to interject there?
No, nothing really to add. I think you guys covered everything about this story and why it's important, as well as Mark Waid's work on JLA. I'm familiar with it in pieces. I've never read the whole, all of his stuff together. I've never, Tower of Babel, the collection, I haven't read, but I've read bits and pieces. I've read a couple issues here and there, throughout the years, because of course I had to always go back and read it. It was during that time I wasn't reading comics, or at least superhero comics. But that Batman story, that whole trope of him being the weakest character in the Justice League because he's the most human, puts him on that edge of, is he a hero or is he just fully a villain, just waiting for his moment? And, with having a way to take down everybody around him because he doesn't trust them 100%. And he does have that sort of constant, of course he would never really say it, but that constant fear inside that this, something could happen, and that person could turn against me or turn evil, and I would need to stop them. Just putting all that together, and then of course having it all blow up in his face. It just kind of shows how, with, I think up to that point, because that was written in 2000, that up to there, you've got 60 years of Batman basically being more or less unbeatable. Even the stories where he's with Superman, there's always that like rivalry that happens where Batman's like, I'm going to prove that I can be just as good as you, even though you are basically, a god. I'm going to figure out how to do it. I'm going to use my intellect, and I'm going to find a way to beat you to do stuff. In the 60s and and around then it was always sort of like a, it was cheeky, it was friendly, but here it's like, no, this is the dark underside of Batman needing to be the last man standing, needing to be on top at all times and being able to stop anyone around him, which makes him essentially a villain.
Okay.
Interesting.
That ties into a book that I read that I'd like to talk about, and that is book 4 of The Other History of the DC Universe. And as you see here, this is centered around Renee Montoya. Again, The Other History of the DC Universe is written by John Ridley with art by Giuseppe Camuncoli. I'm sure I butchered that. And a couple of other artists contributing. And it's basically focused on the characters of color in the DC universe. We've had profiles of Black Lightning and Malin Karen from the Titans and Katana. And this time around, we have Renee Montoya. Renee Montoya is someone who came to the United States and to Gotham City as an undocumented alien from the Dominican Republic. And she's also a lesbian. So we have this detailing of her life in the Other History or History of the DC Universe format. Throughout the story, we have her very unique takes on what growing up in Gotham is like, on the Bat family, which is really something. It was interesting because, she does have a romantic history with Kate Kane, aka Batwoman, and yet that really didn't change her opinions of the Bat family, according to this. And just a commentary of somebody, again, Gotham City, can represent Chicago, it can represent Manhattan, it can represent various areas. It, according to the DC Atlas, it's in New Jersey, so I know some urban centers that you can make some Gotham City-esque arguments, that I have a connection to. And seeing Gotham City through her eyes is a very interesting take. Again, the character of Renee Montoya actually was originated outside of the comics in Batman the Animated Series. That was her first appearance. Greg Rucka truly gave her life as a Batman family character. And what we have here is a commentary of somebody, again, she eventually becomes the Question. But for most of the time that we've known her, she has been a non-superpowered character. And the perspective that she offers is something that we really haven't seen, or we haven't seen voiced in the way that probably should have happened well before. Ridley must be the biggest fan of Greg Rucka, because there are small, teeny, tiny elements of Nomad's Land and some other things that Rucka, and 52 and things that Rucka was part of, that he just inflates to proportions that you didn't think were possible. And this has been consistently a really good series, and this is a very welcome addition to it. I'm surprised this wasn't bannered for Pride Month because of because of Renee's discussion in this book, and especially from the Latina community, of a particular issues arise from backgrounds with the Catholic Church, and her estrangement from her family. There was a lot of material in here that I thought would have been well spotlighted from that Pride logo, because I do think it's a story that should be read on that basis, but it's also at the same time that's disruptive of a much bigger project here. So I understand why they may not have done it. But from her perspectives on Crispus Allen, her perspectives on Harvey Bullock, on Jim Gordon, on Batman, on perceptions of who these maniacs that take over Gotham consistently are, and a theory that they're all the offspring of these twisted offspring of some of the richer families, which certainly is the case of Penguin and Hush, but not all of them. But the average person on the block on Gotham doesn't know that. Her moving up the ranks in the GCPD, and her dealing with prejudice and straight, issues in advancement because of that. And sometimes, she ended up on a much more positive end. The introduction of Maggie Sawyer into the story. I mean, this is a really good book. And if you want a primer of some of the stuff that went on in the Batman universe, you could do worse. This is, but it's a perspective that we really have never seen, or if we have seen it, we've seen it in flashes. So very, very welcome addition to this series.
That's pretty cool.
Steve, I know you've been getting it. I don't know if that's on your back.
I need to catch up. I've only read up to the second issue, so I'm 2 issues behind. I mean, the whole concept, and I kind of understand, like you had mentioned, that it is a little bit disruptive if you were to banner it for Pride. However, it did come out almost on time for Pride Month, so maybe it was timed a little bit like that. Probably not, though, because we know that this whole project has been delayed, quite a bit prior to COVID, and of course with COVID. But yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful format. I think the oversized format for the issues really is to the benefit of a book like this, to the design of the book. I think it just allows a lot more everything on the page, art, and they can do interesting things with with the text and with the images inside. The artwork has been, at least on the 2 issues that I've read, has been consistently really interesting, and I think that's really great. That
yeah. And I know Caleb loves his Batwoman, so I mean, look at some of the depictions in there.
So I have not been getting this book. Shame on me. I am going to remedy that. I'm hoping they do like a nice hardcover edition, because
I'm certain. The Black Label is made for shelf porn. So
right.
I'm certain they will.
From what I'm seeing of it, it's gorgeous, and I will say, so my introduction to this series, I forget if it was on a podcast or if I was watching something else, but I actually heard David F. Walker talking about it a little bit, who's somebody that I have a deep and profound amount of respect for in the way that they talk about comics, and the way that they talk about the intersectionality of comics and how important comics are to representation. And the way he spoke about this book really told me that it was something special. So I'll try to see if I can find that, where he was talking about it. But the way that he speaks, especially about Black Lightning, which I think was the first issue, is something that I want to read, and it really is something that needs to be read in the broader conversation of comics.
It's also very important, worth mentioning, that the characters basically stay in the time period where they were introduced. So with Renee Montoya's an early 90s introduction, we have a through line from that to September 11th being mentioned. So again, the Black Lightning and the Titans book were very 70s centric. Katana was very 80s centric. So that's a nice twist that exists in the book as well. And real life characters, like there's a very interesting commentary here about the death of Arthur Ashe from AIDS. So get it at some point. If you wait on that, I think that's okay. I know I said everything about the buying the books as they come. I just said that with JLA. I don't think you'd have any disruption from this, because the distinct chapters are so stylized for the topics that they cover. So I don't think
but you miss out on all the covers.
Now we're running a bit late, so I know we each have another book to get to. So let's do that, but let's speed that up a little bit. Okay.
Not a problem. I did want to bring up some of the comments that we've had here. James Figueredo has actually joined us as well. And to Caleb's book, I think Mark Waid was the perfect choice to both fill in for and follow up Grant Morrison. I love that era, and it's really nice to contrast Busiek's Avengers that was published at the same time. And I think that's pretty good. And then also John Runyon has to make a comment here. If Nighthawk and Squadron Supreme were in charge of Gotham, it'd be a different vibe. World's Greatest Detective per Heroes Reborn, which we're completely unaware of. I have never heard of that initiative from that other company. I'm sure it means nothing. And then we're also joined tonight by Anthony Comito. Montoya, as the question would be a welcome addition to Batwoman. Anything to make that show more interesting. And that was actually something I also feel that they missed out on. I know that they had, I want to say Renee Montoya was in Supergirl on a couple of the earlier seasons.
She was boring.
And then was gone really.
Oh, that was boring.
Yeah, there was not much going on there. Unfortunately, would have been really good for Batwoman, but
maybe think it would make an excellent foil for Supergirl's sister, but somehow it didn't work.
It didn't work out. Yeah. And I think that character has been more or less replaced by is it Sophie?
No, I don't think Sophie is an analog at all.
Not really an analog, but sort of like fulfills that role kind of
for
the
Kate,
cop who's
for
also
Kate, possibly. Yeah. But no, I don't.
Romantic.
Yeah, no. She, her grounding, Sophie's grounding is far different from Renee's.
Yeah, I
in regards to why
it's
she's part of law enforcement. Yeah.
Yeah, if we throw in another cop who's also a lesbian who has something with Kate Kane, I don't know if it'll work on the show. But hey, So I'll quickly talk about the second book that I had up here, and it is specific for the DC Pride cover version. So it is Crush and Lobo #1. This beautiful cover is brought to you by Yoshitaka, and it's very gorgeous. I love it. And basically, this is the first issue of the new miniseries for Crush and Lobo. Crush being Lobo's daughter, who was introduced in the last Teen Titans series, the one that came out before Teen Titans Academy. And she was an integral part of that series. And at the beginning of Teen Titans Academy, I believe she quits. She quits the team and goes off because she's angry and she's got a lot of rage issues. But in this book, we find her with a girlfriend, a cute, normal girlfriend named Katie, who she absolutely loves and adores and thinks that she is completely not good enough for. Katie loves her. She doesn't know why. And of course, she makes a big mess of Katie's birthday party, leading to a potential breakup right off the bat. So we're introduced to the character, and then now they're breaking up, which is a little sad. But she has a nice heart-to-heart with Artemis, and we also find out that her father,
Red Arrow,
Red Arrow, not Artemis, Red Arrow. We find out that her father, Lobo, is in prison somewhere, potentially somewhere in the galaxy, we don't know, and wants her to come and visit. So. With all the crap that's going on in her life, she decides to hit the road to go see Daddams, and that's going to end up being crazy. This book is brought to you by Mariko Tamaki, who, of course, is everywhere these days, and I love it. She really gets, characters who are queer, of course, Crush being a lesbian. I think that she is going to be able to write her very respectfully and very well. And then also the art is very good by, and I'm going to mess up her name, Amanke Nahualpine. And with colors by Tamara Bonvillain, who's of course everywhere as well, and letters by Ariana Mayer. Really cool, very fun. Some interesting dialogue choices, and she does basically spend the entire time narrating the story, breaking that fourth wall. I really enjoy it. Maybe it'll continue to be good. I like Mariko Tamaki, so I'm going to give this one a shot.
I like her writing very much as well. I wasn't enamored of the last incarnation of Teen Titans. I thought there were threads that went on way too long to get to a particular point.
It was the Robin show. It was
I
100%
also,
the
but
Robin
I also
show.
have to say, like, I like this version of Crush much more. She's much more fleshed out in this than we ever saw her in the series, and I think a lot of that is naturally because of Mariko Tamaki's writing. I enjoyed this more than I thought I would, and again, as you're seeing here, we have the Pride covers. One thing outside of the story that I really loved was you have some back pages about Pride characters. And though it's an ad, it gives you a backlist and some of the recommendations that people can go to if they want to explore other DC books with LGBTQIA plus content. Liked it much more than I thought I would.
About.
Yeah,
some of
liked this much more than I thought about. Then it's again, unfortunately, because of my shipping, I don't have a lot of the Pride covers yet, but I do have the one for Batman 109 too. And so looking good. Marvel has some coming up as well. Ed Luce's book variant cover came out today. So you be on the lookout in your stores for these pretty cool Pride variants. Nice to be acknowledged.
Give in to the corporate branding. Give in.
Please, God, stop! Make it stop! Make it stop! No, I'm not saying the corporate branding make it stop. The queers complaining about the corporate branding make it stop, because these would be the first people, if there wasn't corporate branding, who would be complaining. Okay. I do think there are valid arguments. I do think there are companies that probably should have more inclusive policies more than one time a month, or more inclusive representations one time a month. I think those are very valid arguments, but some of these prissy queens are fucking pissing me off. They really are. So.
Oh, but tell us how you really feel.
I'm sorry. I had a long day. I had a long day, and I felt like a very small person, like trying to get Foo Fighters tickets to the first major concert since the pandemic started, and Springsteen on Broadway. Those will make you feel very, very small.
And as David Toby says, La Bamba is how you feel about that.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'd say this more. Well, I don't know. It's almost La Bamba. It's La Bamba-esque, but it's not fully in camp of La Bamba.
Just La Bamba adjacent.
Yeah, La Bamba adjacent.
Just on
LBA.
Okay, let's move over to Caleb. Caleb, tell us about another book that you're reading that you're digging.
Absolutely. So I want to get to it, but just on the note of what you were just talking about with the corporate stuff and everything. Number one, DC also has some really cool Pride shirts that they are selling, like the Wonder Woman logos, everything with the rainbow. I want that Wonder Woman shirt very badly. I will own that.
Oh yeah.
But also, having a mutual conversation with some friends about this very thing today. One of the Walton organizations, Walton being the Walmart family, Walmart owns Arkansas, where it's based out of and everything. They decided they were going to do this outreach thing, give a bunch of money to LGBTQ organizations, which is wonderful. They should. Where you're saying there is some valid argument to that is the other side of that is, where were they literally 4 months ago when the legislature was banning medication for trans teens? That's the issue I get into is if you're going to do it all the time. But to your point, and what I also said to this person who was railing against corporate pride and this, that, and the other, the opposite of that is not that they just don't do it. The opposite is that they do the Chick-fil-A model where they use their money to pander to not us and pass laws that strip our rights away. So I would much rather be pandered to for 1 month by somebody who maybe just wants it for a profit margin than have them actively use their money to pander to the other side of things who think that we don't want basic human rights or we don't deserve basic human rights. So that's kind of where I'm just like, what do you want? Ask for more, but I damn sure don't want less. So the book that I want to talk about just real quick, I'll speed through it. It's actually the end cap to a series that I thought was brilliant. I loved it. I got really excited when I saw this in previews catalog being pitched. It's written by the great Larry Hama. And for a lot of people, that pings some things. I love Larry Hama, but for me, the strength in this book was actually the art by Dave Wachter, who I think is a wonderful artist. He's a sweet man. Love to talk to him at cons. One of the most well dressed individuals you run into at a con at any given moment. With colors by Neeraj Menon, and that book is Iron Fist, Heart of the Dragon. Issue 6 came out, last book of the series. Beautiful little mini series. I hope that it's up for awards next year. It would be cool to see that just from the art alone. Essentially, this book it's supposedly in continuity, but it's also set to where it doesn't have to be. Iron Fist, things are going well for him. Things are lining up. Friendship with Luke Cage is awesome. Then all of a sudden, he starts noticing something is wrong with chi. Something is wrong with everything that powers the Iron Fists. And so he goes to kind of meditate on it. He goes to kind of figure things out. And what he is slowly but surely realizing is that somebody is killing the great dragons of heaven. There's 7. 7 is actually a number that's popped up in a lot of things I've read tonight, including the JLA. But something is killing these dragons, and they're stealing his hearts. They do some investigation. He gets a really kind of a team together of some of these kung fu masters, people who are not Iron Fist, but they're individuals. They are totems, so to speak, of different styles of kung fu. There's the Fat Cobra. There's the Widow of Spiders. There's all these cool guys, along with longtime and kind of beloved character Fu, who is like a little sidekick of Iron Fist, who is there for comedic relief all the time, carries a musket, shoots it at things. Awesome. And they start working through to find out what's going on and try to see if they can get ahead of the game and start saving some of these dragons. About issue 3 or 4, I forget which one, it all kind of comes to a head, where they are saving one of the last dragons who's alive, and they find an ally in Okoye from Wakanda. And they're thinking, okay, this is great. Like another amazing martial artist tied into it. But Okoye isn't what they think. She makes a move. She slays one of the dragons, which really freaks them out. But it's Okoye, right? Okoye is not a bad person. There is a method to the madness. By the end of the series, they figure out what's going on. It's a culmination. It's bringing the forces of the chi together. Dragons are, in sense, if you think of the great history of Iron Fist, Shao-Lao the Undying, they are in fact undying. What we think of as immortal death is not death for dragons. Okoye knows this and uses it to their advantage. Of course, there's a villain, right? There is somebody who has instigated all of this. It's this figure who is trying to amass all the powers of chi by stealing all the hearts of the dragons. He's got an acolyte who is somebody who has been betrayed by the Rand family. Somebody that's very much the corporate aspect of the Rand family has hurt them, has damaged them. Some very real things has turned them into a villain. And they've teamed up. Wachter draws armies of zombies, giants, dragons, the most mystical elements of Iron Fist history. Is beautiful. If you know Wachter's work from Turtles, you know what kind of gravity he brings to his pages. Mm-hmm. It is phenomenal. I cannot get enough of these pages. Beautifully colored, beautifully rendered. And like any good Iron Fist book or any good Kung Fu book, martial arts book, the action sequences are astonishing. The way that he draws a fight, a martial arts fight, you couldn't. I mean, the only way I could ask for more is if it was maybe a sequence being drawn by Warren Ellis, who I think writes some of the best fight sequences in comics. The way that he lays things out. Other than that, I mean, you're dealing with top notch stuff here. At the end of the day, they save people that they want to save because comics and good guys, and they win always, and it's awesome. But it's a truly fun story, and it has all of the tension and all of the heart of a good Iron Fist story should have. And I cannot recommend this enough. So Iron Fist, Heart of the Dragon, 1 through 6. Like I said, the names on the cover alone, Larry Hama, yeah, get the fuck out of here. Yeah, Dave Wachter, done, son. So go check it out.
I have a Dave Wachter art book, probably from the first time I met him at a convention, and he drew Black Hawk on the back of it. And I love my Black Hawk. Yeah. And it was interesting seeing something in his style that's not something he usually would attack. There's also a man thing in there that is just beautiful.
Is it Blackhawk's Man Thing?
Y'all motherfuckers need Jesus.
Hey, that was plural and unnecessarily so. I didn't do anything.
You didn't, yeah. The other asshole.
Hey,
Okay.
he laughed.
Okay. I'm
Before we
very
roll
quick.
out, I'll show some of the pages from this if you can
Yeah.
see it.
Have you also seen Wachter's Godzilla?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's gorgeous stuff. Okay, I'm going to talk about this book rather quickly. I know that Caleb read it as well. This Fantastic Four life story, #1, covers the 1960s. It's written by Mark Russell with art by Sean Izakase. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's so funny. We always these unfamiliar artists that we talk about. We always deliver their names as if a nun's gonna smack us. It's like fun. Really okay.
Let me bust your bubble on this. I loosely know Sean. He's from South Africa. His name is pronounced Isaacs.
Isaacs. Okay.
Yep. So Sean Isaacs is how you pronounce his name.
He's South
African.
Okay.
He's a good dude. Really good dude.
All right, neat. So it follows the conceit that was established in Chip Zdarsky's Spider-Man life story, where a decade is covered in a particular issue. Also a thread in other history of the DC Universe, the other book that I mentioned. And this version of the Fantastic Four is a Fantastic Four where Reed and Ben do not know each other prior to the mission. We have the input of real-life characters, most prominently in the positions of President Kennedy and President Johnson. Within the timeline, where we're at the very beginning is 1963. We've been a failure in the space race. We've had 3 rockets that have not made it. And Reed Richard is engaged to see if he can change that. And just the long story short, they put something together, funding is pulled, and they decide they're going to go off anyway. And who's going to go off but the 4 people that end up becoming the Fantastic Four. There's a novel explanation of the 4 outfit. I did think that there were some elements of the 60s I would have liked to see. I think Ben Grimm may have been an interesting mouthpiece to form some discussion of the civil rights movement around. I also do think because Johnny is a teenager at the start and still a young adult at the end of the 60s, that his interpretation of hippie culture and where drugs and youth were at, I thought may have been interesting. We do have there's a very cool 1-panel cameo by the Beatles. And throughout the story, Reed is, through the 60s, haunted by the image of Galactus. And where we end up at the end of the issues, we find that his concern of this vision that he had in regards to some being along the lines of Galactus was warranted. Interested to see where the 1970s take us in the next issue. Mark Russell is consistently one of the best comic book writers out there right now, and I dug it. And it's a Marvel book. Yeah, I do read some Marvel. Seriously, I do. See, there's the next one book. That is a book that I really dug, and you might too. So.
I'm right there with you. Like you said, I read this, and number one, I love the conceit. I love the conceit of they're actually aging in real time, which even makes it better that they actually Sean actually draws Johnny like a teenager here. Whereas a lot of things, he's as tall as Ben. He's as tall as Mr. Fantastic in a lot of books. He looks like he's 25 to 30 in a lot of books. He's straight up a twink here. Like he's just a teenager. It's awesome. And my favorite moment, and it's something that Mark Russell tries to work into most of his books, there's always a time that they break the fourth wall. In this book, when they set up the relationship between Reed and Ben, they really don't set it up very well. Like they're not really saying how they weren't necessarily, I don't think, college roommates. They don't explain it.
No.
Other than the fact that, hey, Johnny says, "Hey, I know this guy who's a pilot." How does Johnny? He's a teenager. How does he know a pilot? And they actually ask him. And Johnny turns around and has this look on his, like he looks into your eyes, and he's just like, "I don't know." Like, it's this wonderful moment.
We might get there, we might not. We've only got a few issues. Yeah.
Like, where he breaks the fourth wall, and that's not a character I think of when I think of a breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah.
But it's just it's so perfect. It works out so well. You can't say enough about Sean's work. I always say this. I will always work in once an episode where I see a piece of art where I want to own it. There is a page in here where they are fighting Mole Man for the first time. Mole Man is my second favorite Marvel villain. I love the Mole Man.
Okay.
I think he is awesome. Like, if they ever show me Mole Man on the screen, I'll flip out. Yeah. It's just so cool. He from a narrative standpoint, his storytelling is amazing, but visually he understands the essence of these characters and just nails it from his expressions to everything. It's just badass. Like, it's great. Yeah, I can't wait to get more of this.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what terrain is covered in the next decades.
Yeah.
Be really interesting. Okay, well, we're going to start wrapping this episode up, and when we wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears podcast up, we do so with a segment we call the Woofs of the Week segment. In the bear community, if you find a fellow attractive, you woof at him, and we do something very similar here, where we spotlight something which may be a comic book, but it may also be a film or a TV program or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener or viewer, may be interested in sampling. I'll start, as I always do, with Steve. Steve, what is your woof of the week?
My woof of the week is Sweet Tooth, the TV series on Netflix. And, the people who watch the show know why Sweet Tooth is really awesome. The show does take some liberties and changes a few things a little bit. But one thing that I do know about this is that it has much more of a universal appeal than you would think that a show based on on a post-apocalyptic situation with a deer boy and a very massively dark and depressing storyline that stretches out over the series of the original Sweet Tooth comic would be so popular. It is very universal in its appeal. So what I'm recommending is I recommend Sweet Tooth, the TV series, to be recommended to people who do not read comics and see how they feel about it. If they really enjoy it, recommend the comics to them. But honestly, I think that the show has more of an appeal than I originally expected it to have for people who are not comics nerds or who have nothing, no history with Jeff Lemire and have no idea how wonderful and how much of a genius he is. So
it's been interesting seeing the top 10 listing in Netflix, and like for the last 8 days, it's been Sweet Tooth or Lucifer, Sweet Tooth, Lucifer, Sweet Tooth, Lucifer.
Most shows based on comics that are watched by more people who have never read the comics.
Touch comics, Okay, I have watched the first 2 episodes. I look forward to watching more. I just haven't had the opportunity yet.
Yep. My husband loved it. He watched and our neighbor who was not a comic book person came up to him today and said, "You all should watch this show. It's called Sweet Tooth on Netflix." And it's like, yes, we know of it.
All right, over to Caleb. Caleb, what is your woof of the week?
All right, I'm going to take a page out of Steve's book this week and talk about a TV show, which is, I don't do quite often. But there is a new show. I say new. It's new to me. It's on HBO. You can also find it streaming on Hulu. And the show is called The Mayor of Easttown. If you haven't seen this show, it is spectacular. I love it. I fell in love with it from the first episode. It stars Kate Winslet as this kind of small Pennsylvania town detective. For those of you who haven't seen it, and she is dealing with a number of things from being, a older female detective in a small town that's riddled with drugs and family angst, and everybody's cheating on everybody, and bodies are just dropping of young women, and she has to figure out what's going on with it. It's got an all-star cast. Jean Smart plays her mother, and Jean Smart cracks me up all over the place. You also have a mix of characters. David Denman, who's a character that I didn't know from this, very woofy. He plays her ex-husband. Could get it all over the place, and then also for those of you who like American Horror Story, your boy from American Horror Story, Evan Peters, is all up in this. He plays another detective that steps in. the mystery, so to speak, all circles around these young women who are missing / are continued to be murdered in the town, with lots of side drama. So I really dug the show. Check it out.
Okay.
Does she spend a lot of time talking about hoagies? Does she spend a lot of time talking about hoagies from Wow?
Have you guys seen the takeoff on Saturday Night Live of this Murder Dirter?
Yeah. No,
Murder Dirter.
You have to see Murder Dirter.
Murder Dirter.
You will probably be cracking up after you see that. Yeah, Murder Dirter. All right, I'm going to break the mold here. I'm not going to talk about a comic book. I'm going to talk about someone in my life, and that is my straight concert husband, Thomas Moynihan. On July 15th, 1991, we saw our first concert together, which was Joe Jackson and Jill Sabuel at Radio City Music Hall. And on July 15th, 2021, we're going to see another concert together, and it's Jill Sabuel. So what are the cosmic chances 30 years later to the day that we would be able to together see one of the artists at the first concert we ever saw? There's something very cosmic about this. I haven't been following some of the developments with concerts because they've kind of been at breakneck speed lately with things being introduced and announced. So I didn't even know about this. So he laid out what my birthday gift was. So unfortunately, that's a Thursday, so there will be no comic book bears that night. But just wanted to thank him for that. And I shudder to think how old you two were on the date of my first concert. I didn't want to think about it because and he was probably baby, right?
What year was it?
July 15th, 1991.
4.
I'm still cooler than both of you.
No doubt in my mind.
Tom, thank you very much for that. I'm super looking forward to it, and just the cosmic. We said cosmic a lot on this episode today. Cosmic has worked it, but it's a cosmic confluence that what are the chances? Well, no, I'm enjoying the result of those chances. So, so that's my Wolf of the Week. All right, so we're wrapping this one up. Again, we are the what do you have for me, Steve? Is it a comment from somebody?
We've got comments just before. We've got some last minute comments here.
Sure.
David says his Wolf of the Week is this damn podcast. So thank you very much, David.
Thank you, David.
James is agreeing with Caleb. Your priorities are all right. And Tony Gilkinson, of course. Thanks, guys, for the recommendation last week of I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. Got it on Sunday and read it straight through with a heart. So hopefully that means he really liked it.
I also got some feedback from. Yeah, I also got some feedback from somebody who bought it from our show who is not a comic book reader, and they really enjoyed it. So I don't know if they want me to say who they are, but I love seeing feedback like that as well. That's so cool.
Yeah. We're gonna push Manny. Manny's gonna make some sales.
Yeah. Why are all these gay men with beards?
Why are they buying my book?
What's happening there? All right. Anyway, all right. So I'm running out of steam, folks. So let's call this a day. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. If you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. If you want to listen to us, please do so by downloading us through iTunes, listening to us through Stitcher Radio, or catching us on some of the other podcatching platforms. If you're watching us through Facebook Live, thank you very much for joining us. If you're watching this through YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and leave a review. We would greatly appreciate that. Until next time, I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Steve Morey.
And I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
You're going to hear a woof and an explosion, and we'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.